Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is John Bravender. I'm the Warning Coordination Meteorologist at the National Weather Service Central Pacific Hurricane Center. I want to thank you for taking the time, especially those in attendance here in person, taking the extra time to come and join us for the season outlook and for this commitment to getting ready for hurricane season. I'd also like to thank the University of Hawaii, the IT Center, for their hosting us in here, and especially to the Atmospheric Sciences Department, in particular Alex Lee, who made this possible for us to have this here on campus again. It's a little hard to get ready for hurricane season when it seems the wet season just doesn't want to let go. To talk about the recap of the last wet season and the outlook for the coming dry season, I'd like to introduce our Senior Service Hydrologist, Kevin Kodama.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Looking back to October at the start of the wet season, things were a lot different from what they are now. Back then, we had severe drought in portions of all 4 counties in the state, and we even had extreme drought, which is the D3 category on the U.S. Drought Monitor map, portions of Maui and the Big Island. The last wet season was influenced by an El Nino event that was in the process of intensifying and eventually became a strong level event that peaked late last year and is right now starting to weaken, or in the process of weakening. So that had a controlling, or it played a big role in determining the rainfall that happened during the last wet season. So with that in mind, the forecast called for below average rainfall during the October through April wet season, and that's consistent with what you would normally expect during an El Nino wet season condition. And that was also consistent with the dynamical models that we had, our guidance that we look at. But the reality was the rainfall totals that by the end of April, we ended up with near to below average rainfall at most locations, but it was not quite as dry as it was anticipated. So, it's one of those things where, when you think have a pretty good handle on the situation, our forecast at the time, we had a high level of confidence, and you think you got things under control and you know what's going on, Mother Nature comes around and says, no, you don't. And so as a recap of what happened during the wet season, October and even into the mid part of November was actually pretty dry. We had below average rainfall during that period across at most areas of the state. And then from November through January, we had several rain events that occurred that kind of took the edge off drought, mitigated some of the drought impacts, and kind of brought some relief to the state, even though those events weren't what you would normally expect out of an El Nino event, and especially a strong El Nino event. And then February and March came around and things dried out again. And so this is at the time of the wet season where I felt like, see, I told you, here's the dryness. And we actually had severe drought start to pop up again on portions of Maui and then the Big Island. And then mid-April, right at the tail end of the wet season, you think things should start calming down. And then we had a big mid-month heavy rain event. In fact, for some places in South Kauai, it ended up producing a record rainfall for the month of April, and quite a bit of flooding on the south side of that island. And so we had wet conditions from Kauai to Molokai, but it's still, that rainfall never quite reached the east half of the state completely. And so we still had some dry conditions in Maui and the Big Island. And so drought persisted on those parts of the state. So looking at the numbers for the wet season, overall, we ended up with the 10th driest wet season in the last 30 years. So right on the edge of the dry category. But quite honestly, I thought it was going to be a lot worse. I wouldn't have been surprised if it, going at the start of the wet season that we ended up with a top 5 driest wet season, but it didn't end up that way. So we ended up with the 10th driest wet season, and looking at the different islands, Kauai ended up having most areas with near to above average rainfall. Lihue Airport had near average, was right in the middle. It was like 14th wettest in the last 30 years. Oahu had near to below average rainfall totals in a lot of areas. Honolulu Airport had its 10th driest wet season in the last 30 years. And the picture is a lot different in the first half of May, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Maui County, most totals were near average, maybe near to slightly below average. Kahului Airport had its 11th driest wet season in the last 30 years. Molokai Airport had its 7th driest wet season. And on the Big Island, the windward areas, about 50 to 80% of average. And then the rest of the Big Island, most of the totals were definitely in the below average category. Hilo Airport ended up with the 7th driest wet season in the last 30 years. So looking forward for the May through September dry season, right now we have probabilities favoring a La Nina developing. So El Nino's, as I mentioned, is in the process of weakening, and that'll transition quickly into a La Nina event. And that La Nina, once it develops, is expected to persist into the early part of next year, which is what you would expect. That's perfectly normal. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, their forecast probabilities favor below average precipitation for the rest of the dry season. I have to stress the rest of the dry season. And this is also consistent with the climate models that we look at, the climate consensus of those climate models. So the big caveat, as I just mentioned, is that the dry season totals will be skewed mainly because of the rainfall that we just had in the first half of this month. We just ended the latest Kona low that we've seen in over 20 years. And, as an example of what it did, the May rainfall at Honolulu Airport through yesterday was 4.90 inches. And that has already passed the average rainfall for May through September at that location. So we're already just right out the gate, we're above average at Honolulu Airport. But the rest of the dry season, our guidance is that we're looking at below average rainfall totals through the remainder of the dry season. And so this is also consistent with what you would expect for the summer during a developing La Nina event, and also consistent with our climate model guidance that we're seeing. So what does that mean? So for many areas of the state, the April and May rainfall that we've had should help delay the onset of significant drought. What I mean by significant would be severe or D2 category on the U.S. Drought Monitor map. The exception, a couple of big exceptions here. One is the leeward slopes of Haleakala and Maui, and also the interior section of the Big Island, because these two areas never quite got the full amount of that spring rainfall. And so they're still in severe drought right now. There are pockets of those two areas that are still considered to be D2 on the U.S. Drought Monitor map. So they're already in drought, and things should continue to get worse as we move along in the coming weeks and months. Impacts, once drought starts to develop, and they're expected to primarily or most significantly impact non-irrigated agriculture and water systems that depend on surface water diversion. So we're talking about places like upcountry Maui, and any residents that are on water catchment systems. So they'll be feeling impacts of the drought first, or the earliest, and also will have the most severe impacts as the drought goes on. Because of the late wet season rainfall, significant wildfire risk, and what I mean by significant is big ignitions and runaway ignitions. They're not expected to develop until perhaps later than what we would normally expect, which would be normal is usually late July into early August, and this may not occur until later on in the summer. Again, the couple of exceptions would be those areas I mentioned, so leeward slopes of Haleakala and also the interior section of the Big Island. And so that's all I had. We have some online links to maps for your reference if you're interested. These have a breakout of the wet season rainfall by island, and also the percent of average map that you see on the screen there. That's also available on the links in the media advisory. And so that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And for everyone here, we have hard copies of the Season Outlook media advisories that we're referencing, and it'll also be sent out afterwards for everybody to have PDF copies as well. And next, I'd like to bring up James Barros, Administrator of Hawaii Emergency Management Agency.
Thanks, John. As we're getting ready to present the Governor's Proclamation on Hurricane Preparedness Week, preparedness is all of our business, starting with the individuals to their families, building in the neighborhood and communities. Every state department and agency is in the business of preparedness. With our partners in the county, with our federal partners from the National Weather Service and the Coast Guard and our FEMA friends, to our businesses, to our nonprofits, we all have a stake in this preparedness. And this year, it feels very much like a Kako thing as we're getting ready for this preparedness hurricane season. So I'd like to read the Governor's Proclamation. Whereas hurricanes are one of nature's most powerful and destructive forces on Earth, and whereas the destructive potential of hurricanes present widespread threats of wind, heavy rain, damaging surf, land and coastal flooding, lightning, and tornadoes that may accompany these powerful storms both directly in the path of the storm or hundreds of miles within the wake of the storm. And whereas Hurricane Dora, while hundreds of miles away from Maui, still contributed to the massive August 8, 2023 wildfires in West Maui that claimed 101 lives, destroyed large portions of Lahaina and Kula, and displaced thousands of people and businesses. And whereas hurricane season runs from June 1st to November 30th in Hawaii, and whereas Hawaii and its people must always be vigilant to these weather events and be aware, educated, and ready to take action when storms develop in the Pacific Ocean. And whereas while Hurricane Dora did not directly hit Hawaii, it reminds us that it only takes one storm to change your life, your family, and your community. And whereas before this year's hurricane season begins, the state of Hawaii encourages everyone to be aware of their vulnerabilities of hurricane hazards and develop an emergency plan and have 2 weeks ready of emergency supplies to ensure the safety of ourselves and our loved ones. Therefore, Josh Green, Governor of the state of Hawaii, do hereby proclaim May 19th to 25, 2024 as Hurricane Preparedness Week. Signed, Josh Green, Governor, State of Hawaii. Sir? Thank you. Thank you.
All disasters start locally with neighbors helping neighbors. That's especially true here in Hawaii, where the culture helps us develop tight-knit communities. We might think of looking out for our vulnerable neighbors when we think of the kapuna next door who might not drive anymore, or the person across the street with limited mobility who needs help getting around. We might not think of somebody who isn't a native English speaker and who might not understand what's coming when we say hurricane warning. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce Afirak Bamrungaran, the Executive Director of the Office of Language Access, to talk about that aspect of neighbors helping neighbors. AP?
Thank you, John. Aloha all. My name is Afirak Bamrungaran, Executive Director for the Office of Language Access. Thank you for allowing me to participating in today's press conference. And as well as everyone knows, living in Hawaii, we are no stranger to the beauty and the power of nature. However, with this beauty comes with the responsibility for us to be prepared for severe weather, including the upcoming hurricane season. As we prepare ourselves and our family, we must also extend our efforts to our neighbors, particularly for those who do not use English as their primary language, or we call them limited English proficiency individuals, because they are among the most vulnerable population in our state. English proficiency, or the lack thereof, significantly impact people's safety and wellness, putting them at risk in situations where they are unable to understand written or verbal warning about the dangerous condition, or prepare themselves for impending severe weather, respond to appropriate to emergency warning, and communicate during the emergencies. You know, in our Aloha state, we are the most culturally diverse state in the nation, and according to the U.S. Census, about 1 in 4 of our population speak non-English at home. And about 1 in 9 of our population, what we call them limited English proficiency, because they have limited in understanding, reading, speaking English languages. And also a significant number of the visitors to Hawaii also use the language, also use another language than English in their communication. So it is possible that your neighbors or your community or your friends are LEP or limited English proficiency. So as a good neighbor, what can we do? How can we help them during this hurricane season? It might be just a few simple steps that we can all take some action to help our neighbor. First, get to know them, get to know your neighbors, make an effort to meet them. It might be a little bit difficult at first because you do not speak the same languages, but I strongly believe that a good interaction or a good conversation could go a long way, could open a line of communication for you and your neighbors to start talking about it. Secondly, you can share information. Provide your neighbor with easy to read and understand translate material about the hurricane preparedness. As we all know, there are so many multilingual material that created by various agencies from the state level, county level, as well as the federal level. And for your convenience, so my office, we put a lot of translated material on our website. You can feel free to go to our website. And behind you, I see that Haima being a beautiful brochure about the preparedness that in 10 languages, which is the most common languages that speak in the state of Hawaii. So feel free to grab some. If you need more, you can go to our website and print more. And also, you can check in with your neighbor before or after the hurricane. Make sure that they have supply they need or they face any challenges during the preparedness. But the most importantly, I want to take this opportunity for all of us who are part of the government agency and also service provider, as we can also help our neighbor and community by including language access in your communication plan. Language access should not be an afterthought. So any vital information that you prepare for the general public should also be translated into the most common languages spoken in the state of Hawaii. And just keep in mind that some people might not be able to read even in their own languages. So the literacy issue might be one thing that you need to take into consideration. So on top of the written translation, maybe we should think about using another multimedia as a channel of communication, like a PSA, video conference, or video YouTube. I see Haiba have pretty good, funny YouTube hurricane preparedness that people can look into it. So this is one way that we can help our neighbor from both government perspective. I strongly believe that by taking this step, we can help ensure that everyone in our community is prepared and safe. Together, we can make sure that no one is left behind and everyone has the information and support they need to stay safe during the hurricane season. Let's work together to help our neighbors prepare for the hurricane season ahead. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, AP. And next I'll bring up Chris Brenchley, Director of the Central Pacific Hurricane Center. And I'll finally remember to advance the slides. So here you go, Chris.
All right. Thank you, John. And good morning, everyone. Welcome. Aloha. Here we are again. It's good to see so many of you familiar faces here in person. Also know that there are many joining virtually. Really do want to thank and acknowledge all of our partners throughout the government, federal partners, state, county, local, community, our media. Just a fantastic community working together to help our community be resilient during hurricane season. We do this every year. This season outlook, we like to take advantage of that to spread preparedness messages, as well as to give an idea of the prediction for the weather scenario for the coming hurricane season. And I think the thing to really acknowledge and remember is that we're working together all year long to make this make our communities stronger and more resilient. And even though we do this once per year, these activities that we engage in are year round, and strengthening our partnership is very important. The hurricane season outlook is a collaboration with NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. Climate scientists working there have all the tools and expertise needed to see what we're going to have in our long-term forecasts. There's models, there's observations, all of that data that they process give us a glimpse or a probability of what we can see over the coming hurricane season. Working together for that, should I advance? Okay. There we go. Working together with them, we look at what the patterns might bring for the coming year. This time last year, we were looking at a strong El Nino developing. If I recall, we had all 2023 hurricane season, El Nino conditions were present. So we were expecting a little bit more activity. We did get 4 tropical cyclones entering into the Central Pacific. One of those cyclones, Hurricane Dora, went all the way across from the East Pacific through the Central Pacific into the West Pacific, which is a pretty rare occurrence. We also had, in addition to the 4 cyclones, there was 2 that were very close to coming into the East Pacific. So overall, we looked at near normal activity last year, even with a strong El Nino. Some of the factors may have also included that there were cooler than normal waters to the east of Hawaii, which sort of helped those additional cyclones from making it further west into our area. So shifting our attention to this season, the current conditions out across the Pacific have made a drastic switch and are continuing to indicate that cooling waters near the equator will result in a La Nina condition, most likely for this hurricane season. So you can see those blue colors along the equator in the eastern Pacific indicating below normal sea surface temperatures. That implication plays into our hurricane season outlook. And when we have a La Nina condition, a lot of times there's additional wind shear generated near the state of Hawaii and over the Central Pacific, which has a detrimental effect on tropical cyclones developing. There's the latest outlook. The blue bars show the probability of La Nina developing, and you can see it rapidly ramping up to likely by mid to late summer this season. So the outlook for 2024 for the Central Pacific Hurricane Basin is for a below normal season due to the La Nina condition. We expect 1 to 4 tropical cyclones in the Central Pacific Basin this season. Remembering the hurricane season lasts from June 1st through November 30th. And the total number of cyclones that are predicted cover the entire Central Pacific Basin. So there is not a specific indication as to how many of those cyclones would directly impact Hawaii. Tropical cyclones, by definition, include not only hurricanes, but also tropical storms and tropical depressions. These are all different strengths of tropical cyclones that we can see. And one other note, there's some maps from past hurricane seasons where we had below normal tropical cyclone activity, but still had threats to the islands there in 2020. It was below normal season, and yet Hurricane Douglas made a very, very close approach to the state. So important to remember, the numbers don't tell the whole story for the potential for hurricane threat for Hawaii. I appreciate the messages that have been shared about community preparedness. I want to echo those. It's very important to remember everyone, the entire community, as we think about how we're going to prepare to face the potential threat of a hurricane. It's important to prepare for that threat this season and not wait for a season where we expect it to be more active. Any action that you take now, however small, helps the community to be more resilient in the event of a storm impacting the community. It's important to review your emergency action plan and to check your kit to make sure that you have the needed supplies for 14 days. If you need more information, there's a lot of information out online, and we're happy to provide additional information about how to prepare. Together, we look forward to another hurricane season. We look forward to being prepared, and we look forward to facing this potential threat together as a community. And thank you again for your participation today, and I will turn it over to John.
Right. Just to close this out, I wanted to thank you again for joining us to prepare for this hurricane season. As Chris said, even with the below normal activity expected, this is our chance to get ready, because we can't tell you whether the below normal activity will be a 2017 where we barely have anything in the basin, or a 2020 where Douglas skirted by just to our north. I'd like to thank Chris, Kevin, James, AP for joining us and speaking today. And on behalf of them and myself, thank you again. And while I'm holding this, here are hard copies of the outlook, both Kevin's dry season outlook and wet season summary, the hurricane season outlook that we just discussed. These are available to take with you, and we'll also send them out for anybody joining us online as soft copies after this presentation is over. Thank you. Before I forget, I will sit you down back here.